got visions in my head. People tell me that I'm crazy. I tell them that's exactly it.
I am here welcoming Dr. Caroline Leaf onto the show. I am a huge fan. I think the first book I read of yours, I was in high school and I'm 23 now. So I am so excited to
Oh,
have you on.
wow.
Yes, forever ago.
That's so
It,
lovely.
it was the blue, I'm forgetting the actual name, but it was the blue
Switch on
anxiety.
your brain.
Yes, that was the first one.
Okay, wonderful. That's fantastic. Well, that's a long time ago.
Forever ago. But today I want to talk about your most recent book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. I finished it last week and I absolutely loved it. I have told so many of my
Oh,
friends
thank
and
you.
family, I'm like, you have to go read this. It's so good. So I want to start there. You said something, it says,
Thank you.
if we don't transform our pain through reconceptualization, we will transmit it. And then it will take over your thinking in our relationships, which is really what I want to go into today.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great phrase that you've picked up in the book, and it's just so true because thoughts are basically every experience we have become physical changes in our brain and in our DNA and in our mind, which is separate from the brain, but it's all through and around the brain and the body. The mind is this big, almost ethereal, biggest part of us that none of us understand much, but it's to our mind that we process life into our brain and into our body and into little memory tracks in our brain as well, in our mind as well. Sorry. And so, if we have a toxic issue that's undealt with, some kind of a trauma or whatever, that then is that it becomes, and you keep thinking about it or you've suppressed it. It's got so much energy that it starts influencing the way that you think. So if you think of, I often use the example of the redwood trees in California, and they have such an extensive root system. That's what the thought trees in our brain have got. Like all trees have root systems. These have the toxic thought trees have insidious root systems. They really penetrate other things, so they influence other thoughts, and all thoughts are experiences that we've had. So, and then those experiences play into how we run our life. So they then become this all-consuming thing that influences us. And I've got lots of little analogies and images that I can use to dive deeper into this.
I love that. Can you explain the difference between the mind and the brain?
Good place to start. Okay, so I've got some images for those of you that are just listening. I'm holding up a brain. It's not a real one, it's a brain in a skull. And we've got such a focus currently on the neurocentric focus in our world today, where we focus so much on the brain. And rightfully so. Well, to an extent, that's a good thing because we've learned so much about the brain. I've been in the field for 38 years, which is longer than you've even been alive. And it's a long time. And I've watched the progression from our understanding, how our understanding of the brain has developed. But that has had a negative impact as well because we've become so focused on the brain, not the field that I move in, but a lot of the scientific fields, that we've forgotten all about the mind. So the mind is separate from the brain. Think of the brain as the physical. So you think of your brain in your skull and you look at your body, that's the physical part of you. And that's the more or less 10% of who you are, 1 to 10% of who you are. But if you dead, like you and I are alive now, the difference between you and I alive having this conversation and a dead person is our mind. So the mind is the force that actually drives the brain and the body. It drives the physical. So on a psychological, basic psychological level, it is your mind that's helping you process this conversation. It's your mind that's grabbing my words and the visual images and the sounds and all that stuff. And you thinking and feeling and choosing about that around at about 400 billion actions per second. And then pushing that, the mind grabs that, and then it's like an energy force, electromagnetic force, pushes it through the brain, and then the brain actually responds to this energy flow of my words into your mind, which then into your brain, and it converts that into little vibrations that are in proteins, and those proteins group together to make trees. So I'm holding up a little tree now in a pot, a little green tree in a pot, and like all trees have got root systems and branches. This is a thought tree. This is what same thing in your brain. The thought that you're building now of this information I'm giving you has roots as a root system with lots of information. So all the information I'm giving you are the memories, the data and that's growing into the root system. And then the branches that are growing immediately at the same time are your specific interpretation of what you're hearing. So it's how you're thinking and feeling and choosing about the information. So that's the source, that's your interpretation, and then that's how you would then talk about this information. So your next question that you ask me would be coming from me saying something, you interpreting it, and then you putting all of that together and generating the next question. And that's kind of what we do in life. And that's changing our brain and it's changing our body. So this is not only in your brain, it's in your DNA. And you've got like a little vibration in your mind about this. And as we keep talking, that grows and grows and grows. And then that's how we experience, how we say and do what we do. Now, if we have a toxic thought, the opposite, here's it now, I'm holding up a toxic wiry tree. There's the root system. The root system remembers the source. In this case, the source of this tree are my words in our conversation. Okay, so this would be maybe toxic trauma like the isolation in COVID, or an abuse or bullying or bad relationship experience. So that's the source, and then that's how this part's always how you interpret what you've gone through. It's all the data and the emotions and stuff, the detail about this. And that combination is how you show up. So maybe this was an abuse, you see yourself as shame, you show up battling in relationships. Now, this is toxic to the brain body. It causes brain damage. The immune system wants to get rid of this because it threatens our survival. So it creates a whole physiological response in the brain and the body to reject this, to try and get rid of it. And to tell us that that's happening, that whole rejection process then is manifested in our mind consciously as depression, anxiety, frustration, whatever, all those emotions. In our body as physical sensations and of gut ache or heart pounding, in our behaviors with maybe not maybe being withdrawn or something like that, perspective of life, maybe thinking life sucks. So all of those showing up, ways that we show up, are signals of something that's going on. And basically what we need to do is become thought detectives, look at the signals and then work out what is the story and then reconstruct it. And that's essentially what I'm teaching in my work and what I've done for 38 years.
How are we able to then reconstruct that?
Okay, so we in our mind and our brain. So the difference between the two then is the mind is this big mind thing building the stuff into our brain. So our mind is sort of the 90% of who we are. The brain is the 1 to 10% of who we are. So brain and body physical, the small part, mind, the big part that drives it all. If you're dead, there's no mind. Brain and body disintegrate, nothing happens, okay? So the mind is this huge driving force. Your mind is always working. Your mind is, you can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without oxygen. You can't even go 3 seconds without your mind working. So what we do is we in life, we wake up in the morning and we start experiencing life, and every experience is happening in our environment and we're processing that through our mind into our brain. And as I mentioned, so the brain then receives that and that's restored. So if we've had a toxic experience, we have to go kind of the back way around. We have to become aware of our signals, and that's the process. That the way we do that is the system that I developed over the last 38 years, developing theories, doing clinical trials, working in clinical practice, and now I write all these books. And my most recent book that you mentioned, Penny Up Your Mental Mess, is a simple version. It's my latest research. It's the most updated research on this process of how you fix this. So basically, anxiety, depression, etc., are not physical mental illnesses. They're not like in diabetes or cancer, which is how they've been. What the current medical model or biomedical model narrative is. They're not that. But if you look at them like that, then people think, okay, I've got anxiety and depression. There's something wrong with my brain. I've got mental illness. I'm crazy. I need a diagnosis. I need a medication. I need treatment. There's something wrong with me. And our identity gets tapped. And that leads to a lot of desperation. And that philosophy has been developing over 40 years, and it's been very unsuccessful. It's basically created a situation that people die 8 to 25 years younger because from preventable lifestyle issues when they don't manage their mind. So yeah, so we've got to go back to the basics of mind, what it does, how it drives the brain and the body, how a messy mind causes these physical responses that can make us sick in the brain and the body. I show with my research that with every undealt with issue, you increase your vulnerability to getting these like early problems with cardiovascular diseases, and your body can age quicker, and all that increases your vulnerability, and that's why people die younger. So what do you have to do to fix that? We have to go back to recognizing our humanity, recognizing our individuality, individual stories, and recognizing that depression, anxiety, withdrawing, all these signals in our life, all these behavior patterns are not diseases. They are basically warning signals, and we have to become like a detective. So we have to tune in, we have to literally stand back and observe what we're doing. And we're able to do that. The research, neuroscientific research, shows that as humans, we're absolutely brilliant. We have this incredible wisdom. We have this wise mind that is all about survival. It's all about helping us to survive. And when we stand back and observe our own thinking and feeling and choosing and signals and behaviors and all that stuff, all these behavior signals and emotional signals, we activate the highest level of intelligence in our brain. We pull the two sides of the brain together, we increase blood flow and oxygen, all these amazing things happen in our energy, blood and so on in our brain and the chemicals, and we become much more wise and intelligent. So the neurocycle system that I've developed over these years is how we can encapsulate that, how we can take advantage of that, that way that our mind-brain connection, psychoneurobiology, mind-brain-body connection works, and then make it work for us. So that's kind of the principle operating. The mindset when you come into fixing anything in your life is one of being very kind. It's so important that we get kind to ourselves, that because that changes our neurophysiology, that we don't beat ourselves out and think, oh, I'm crazy, I've got brain disease, there's something wrong with me as an individual, I'm sick, or I'm crazy, no one loves me, and I'm useless, and which does, people can get into that state when they are isolated or rejected by friends or going through these kind of issues, and the narrative is there's something wrong with you, but there isn't anything wrong with you. It's not that there's something wrong with you, it's that you've gone through something. And because you've gone through something, it's become part of you. And this is toxic. So then you're having a reaction. Your body's trying to get rid of this. And it gets rid of it like we have a fever. It tells us there's a physical illness in our body. Depression, anxiety are those kind of signals. Fever is on a par, conceptually wise, as a fever. A fever is telling you that your body's trying to fight an infection. As a depression, anxiety, etc., is your body trying to fight this. And it's telling you. So depression, anxiety are not its. They are warning signals and clues of having that are signaling us to go deep. So then essentially that's the mindset we need to come in. It's okay. It's okay to have a messy mind. You don't know what's coming up when you're in this podcast. None of us do. We don't know what the events and circumstances are of our life. We don't know. We can't control people. We can't control what's going to happen to us, but we can control what's in us. And so that's mind management. So all of my work is around mind management. The neurocycle is the system of mind management, and it can be likened to Amazon. Even if you don't like Amazon, Amazon is a brilliantly efficient system for delivering anything, anytime, extremely efficiently. So the neurocycle is a delivery system. It's not a technique. It's not a therapy technique. You still go to therapy. It enhances therapy, but you're in therapy once or twice a week. You're with your mind 24/7. You wake up with your mind. You go to sleep with your mind. You eat with your mind. You exercise with your mind. So you have to understand your mind, this think, feel, choose thing that processes life and how you experience life, all your emotions and your reactions. That's all mind stuff. So we need to understand that. And the neurocycle basically helps you understand that and then drive it in the direction you want, so that you then change the wiring of your brain. Because if we keep doing something over and over again, if you've got these patterns of ruminating or overthinking or imposter syndrome and all these kind of things, the more we do them, the more they grow in our brain, the more these grow. So we've got to recognize that's not who we are. Those are just signals. So that's the mindset coming in. Is it's okay to have a messy mind, or messy mind is how we experience life. It's okay to be messy, but we have to manage the mess. So we have to get our messy mind to talk to our wise mind. That's really important. We have to be introspective, and that's where the stand back, observe our own thinking, and what's happening, why am I doing this, etc., is the principle operating. So the easiest way to do the neurocycle is to do it, sit down like in the morning or sometime during the day, be deliberate and intentional. Sit down and do it for 15 to 45 minutes. So maximum 45 minutes. You can even do 7 minutes. And you do it's a 5-step process, and you do it for 7, as I said, between 7 and 45 minutes a day. And you do that for 21 days. And in 21 days, and I'll tell you how you do in a moment, that will help you identify the pattern and why you're doing what you're doing. The whole thing is you've got to find out why you're doing what you're doing. And then it helps you to take the energy from that and to reconceptualize it into a healthy thought pattern. This doesn't go away, but you change how it plays out inside of you. So this turns into this tiny little thing that's changed inside of the thought. So I've got a tiny little green tree that I'm putting inside the big healthy green tree. So that's how we want it to play out in our life. I want to have a decent relationship. I want to be able to not panic all the time. I want to be able to control the anxiety. I want to be able to just relax and have fun, deal with whatever it is. How do you want this to play out in your life? You don't want this to be controlling you, that you live in a constant state of anxiety and stress and pressure, etc. So you've got to do the work. It takes time. This is wired in. So it's going to take time to wire it out. So the research out there is that in order to wire a pattern out of your brain, you're going to have to spend at least 21 days doing the basic work, but then still not change your behavior. In 21 days, you'll find the reason and you'll have the new pattern, but now you have to practice using this pattern. You have to turn this into a habit. And that takes another 40 days. And you just do one step for about 7 minutes a day, 1 to 7 minutes a day for 42 days. Then your behavior's changed. And when you're in those situations, again, you're not controlled by this anymore. This is gone. You now have this new way of functioning. So that's basically what the process is. And the way you do the neurocycle, the 5 steps are very scientific. You do them in order. You don't skip a step, and you don't stay on a step for long. So let's say you're doing it for 15 minutes. You spend about 3 minutes per step. And between 1 and 3 minutes, 1 to 5 minutes per step. So you don't solve it in one day. You do a little bit every day. And as you're going through this, what very often happens is when you start seeing the reason why you're depressed or why you're anxious or why there's these patterns in your relationships, you may not have realized you've suppressed some kind of trauma from the past, because we all have trauma. No human's exempt from trauma. Every human battles with trauma, anxiety, depression. These are all normal. They're just at varying degrees at different times of our life. And sometimes it gets really bad and accumulates and we kind of crash. And other times we can sort of cope. So the neurocycle helps you with the in-between times, and it helps you when you've crashed and you've got to really work out why this pattern's in your life. But as you start seeing what's going on, it gets worse before it gets better. So then we can start feeling, you start saying, oh my gosh, I'm depressed because of, because it's not that we've got to be saying I am depression or I clinical depression. That's wrong. What we've got to say is that I'm experiencing the symptom of depression because of, or I'm feeling anxiety because of. That's not who you are. It's not your being. It's a doing. So you're doing that. That's a doing in your life because of something. So when you start seeing why, that can actually make you feel more anxious and depressed. So you get a little bit worse before you get better. Healing is very hard work, and you can hate the healing process because you start seeing these things. And I found that with my patients, and in my book with my clinical trials, we saw that with people, they would say that they would start by saying, I am depression, which is not good. No identity, flatlining brain, which sets you up for dementias. You don't want that. You don't want a flat line of energy in your brain. So you don't want low identity and so on. They would shift within 21 days to saying, okay, I'm not depression. I am depressed because of, but I feel even more anxious and more depressed because now I know what happened to me, all those terrible things that caused that. But know what to do. So there's a total difference there. So it's not a depression where you feel hopeless. It's a sadness more and being really upset that actually happened to you. Then you've got to work on, okay, well, how do I want this to not control me anymore? How do I want it to change? And so between day 22 and day 42 is when you then practice the new way that you want to be. And then that becomes a habit. And then you just do it. Then you're triggered to do the right thing. It's because you've rewired your brain. People think they can rewire their brain in a few days, and then they get stuck. And that's a big issue. These people feel, hey, I'm in therapy and I keep talking about the same thing, but they haven't progressed forward. They just keep maybe talking about how terrible this was. And it is terrible, but you have to take that and you have to reconceptualize it, which is one of the first statements you read out. Reconceptualize is see it differently. You can't control that it happened to you, but you can control what's in you and how it's going to play out into your life. And that takes time. It's not going to happen quickly. I've had some of my patients that would take maybe a couple of years of multiple 63-day cycles. So 63 days is the time it takes to wire out patterns and wire in new healthy patterns and turn them into habits so that you feel in control, that you're empowered. And I showed with my research, you can become 81% more empowered to control stuff. Just 10% will make a huge difference in your life. Okay, so that's sort of the overview. Do you want me to dive in a little bit to the 5 steps, or do you want to ask me some questions about I said a lot of stuff.
I want to talk a little bit, well, a few things. I love what you said about identity. And I actually was having a conversation with a friend last week about this, and I was just saying how it's so incredible that everyone is a lot more open about mental health. And I'm someone who has dealt with it throughout my life. I've been in therapy since I was probably like 8 years old. I'm very proactive. Like, I was also born with this innate desire to always want to grow, which is a really good thing, but also can be bad when I'm like leaning too much on that. And just on the topic of identity, I do think it gets a little bit scary when we are like, I am depressed. I have like almost finding our identity in like mental health, because at the same time you grab towards your identity. So it's harder to want to heal when that's like kind of who you find, like what you find yourself in. And we were just having that conversation. I'm like, I think the verbiage around it really needs to change because it's so important. Another thing you said about being kind to yourself, I was never someone who thought I wasn't kind to myself. I am definitely harder. Like, I expect a lot of myself, but I don't dislike myself. So I thought, oh, I'm really like, I don't have that problem. Until recently, I have done a lot of growing in the past few months, and I really feel like I've come into my own a lot. I'm 23. Like, I am so into like brain health and all of this stuff, which is like not normal for a 23-year-old. But my problem now is that I look back at my old self and I cringe. And I'm like, I still have to work on being kind to my past self. I also liked her at the time, but just because I've changed and evolved in a different time of my life, I think now it's harder for me to be kind to who I used to be, even though that's still me, you know?
I get that, and it's a very good point that you've raised, because we look back, and I think it's a lot of because of what society tells us, is that that's who you are, that's your identity is fixed, and if you change, there's something wrong with you. Meanwhile, our identity is a verb more than it is a noun, and it's even though there's a core, there's you, there's Kenzie, there's me, there's Caroline. We're evolving and we're never the same from day to day. Every experience is changing us, and society has not, our environment, our current sort of philosophies of positive psychology and the wellness movement. It's very much about the ideal that you're supposed to be, and releasing. It's almost as though the inner Kenzie is just one thing, and everything else that wasn't that was all bad, and you kind of embarrassed about your past. Meanwhile, your past is beautiful, because that's where you were at that point, and you made the decisions, and you were like that because of your environment. There's nature, nurture, I factor. Nature's obviously the genetics and stuff that come through. We see that in the specialization of the brain. We have 200 different areas. A brain is divided into sort of 200 areas, and they specialize for each of us. And because you can't do everything. There's a limit to how big your brain can grow, and so you can do stuff that I can't do. So there's something you can do that I can't do, and that goes for all humans. So we have a unique specialization in our brain that only works with our mind. So you can't put our brain in someone else. A brain transplant's never going to really work because of the uniqueness of the structure of the brain. It would have to do a lot of rewiring to accommodate someone else's personality, because your mind's separate from your brain, and it matches. It's like a puzzle fitting in your mind into your brain. So, but it's still an evolving process. So it's not all there as a child. And as you're growing through, and as you say now you're 23, my youngest is 23, and I mean, she's also obsessed with the brain. She works for me. She's one of my research team. And so, there's a growth that happens. We change so much. We're never the same. And especially when you've had toxic things in your environment, no one's exempt from trauma. If you're human and you're alive, you've had trauma. If you're human and you're alive, you've suffered depression. It's not an exam. All of us, because life is filled with adverse experiences, and people that have had their own adverse experience, we're constantly exposed to adverse experiences. Depression and anxiety and behavioral changes and so on are responses to that. And then they shape our identity. But sometimes they shape it in the wrong way. Like this undealt with trauma, for example, can then affect a person to the point where they always think that they're bad, and they shame themselves, or they always think they'll never have a relationship, or something like that. So what you're saying there is, I believe, is probably societally induced, that you should have been okay at that stage, and that's nonsense. In the messiness of life, we repair and we grow, and that's beautiful. That's what we should be honoring in ourselves and in each other. Is let's get the messiness out there, because all of us are a mess. There's no one who's not a mess. All of us are a mess. We have a messy mind, and the big thing is we need to be managing our messy mind. And that's why I talk about cleaning up the mental mess, because it's all about wise mind talking to messy mind, and giving yourself permission to be messy, but then managing that mess and growing through that process.
I want to talk a little bit about self-regulation and get into the 5 steps. That is something that I have really leaned into more in the recent years. I would say specifically probably 9 months. And learning how to self-regulate has been the biggest game changer for me. But I also just want to get into more details on the 5 steps.
Absolutely. Well, when I keep talking about mind management, what I'm doing is talking about managing those every 3 seconds. Like literally, your mind never stops. You go to sleep with your mind, you wake up with your mind. Even how you go to sleep is going to determine how your mind works while you're asleep. So your dreams, nightmares, etc. When you eat, your mind determines how well your digestive system digests that food. So even down to the point, I mean, this is mind blowing. If you're eating a super healthy meal, but you are in a state of total toxicity, you're like really worked up or mad or something, you can lose up to 86% of that nutrition from that meal just
Wow.
because your mind is affecting your ability to actually absorb the nutrients. So that's how powerful our mind is in terms of everything. So if we think of our mind as this, it's our aliveness. Just think of what is mind. Okay, if I'm dead, nothing's happening, everything's dying, brain's gone. But if I'm alive, I'm experiencing and everything's alive in me. You're making a million new cells every minute, all that kind of stuff. So your mind is driving that process. If you look at it like that, then the neurocycle is then how do I make that work well? How do I make, and so the neurocycle is the system of mind management. How can I manage my mind all the time? So neuroscientifically, we see that we can be consciously aware of our thinking and feeling and choosing literally every 10 seconds, which is phenomenal, which means that the whole time we're awake, we are totally capable as humans of standing back and observing, how am I doing this podcast? How am I responding? How are my questions? How are my responses? How are my responses to this conversation I have with my partner? How are my responses in this email? What are my patterns today? What are my patterns as last week? Am I more depressed? Am I more anxious? So we are totally capable of monitoring that constantly and then changing that. But it's a skill we develop, like our identity evolves, our mind management evolves. So the underlying premise that I always tell people is that if your mind is always working, you're naturally going to work towards messiness, because as I said earlier on, we don't know what's coming up. So it's all experimental. It's all hypothesizing. If someone says something to you, you react, you get irritated, that's mess. But you can stay in the mess with your mind, or you can say, oh gosh, what I said was not very kind. I didn't need to get so irritated. Why am I reacting like this? Why did you say that? And that's managing it. So that's mind management. And mind management, therefore, is self-regulation. It's a principle of, if I am standing back and observing my reactions, the way I'm thinking, feeling, and choosing the patterns and changing them in the moment by moment, plus the overarching patterns. So there's the two separate things. There's the overarching patterns of our life that we can track back to, basically to traumas, because we should be trauma informed. Pretty much anything that's adverse is a trauma. And so we need to manage that trauma. And some are they're all different, and there's some are worse than others, but traumas are cumulative. And then there's also the moment by moment, day-to-day stuff. You read social media, you get imposter syndrome, you get an email, you get irritated, someone says something to you that bug you, you just feel off. How do you get yourself back together again? How do you manage those moments? So that's all self-regulation, which is under the umbrella of mind management, and the neurocycle then is the system. It's developed over 38 years of research, scientific application, etc. So it's very, very scientific. I've put the most recent updated version in the book. The second half of the book is all about how to do the neurocycle. There's a chart, there's stories, and then there's exact applications for toxic trauma, etc. How to do it with lots of examples. So basically it's a 5-step scientific process. The overarching mindset is kindness, standing back and observing your own thinking. And the easiest way to understand it is, I would do this with my patients in therapy. Get 2 chairs, put them next to each other. You sit in one, and the other one, the imaginary you is sitting in. And you actually give yourself therapy. You're going to what I call the multiple perspective advantage. You're standing back and observing yourself. So you use you instead of I. And you're not alone. And everything is just kindness, acceptance, gratitude. It's just an environment of complete and utter peace, no matter what's going on in your life, no matter what you've done. And that's so important that you set yourself up like that, because that then changes 1,500 neurophysiological responses in your brain and your body. For example, it'll increase the blood flow to your brain and increase oxygen to the front of your brain, which will decrease impulsivity and increase decision making. Your different parts of your brain will work together more effectively. You'll see a bit more balanced brain waves. You'll be more intelligent. So a bunch of stuff happens, and I explain that in the book too, when you go into this mindset. Then that's the first thing, is get that mindset. Then so you've got all this physiology working for you. Then you prepare your brain for 2 to 3 minutes. And in the book, I give examples. I also have an app called the Neurocycle, which you can get at Google and iTunes. And that's great because I literally am giving you therapy. So I walk you through this neurocycle over the 63 days. Plus, I have a whole bunch of mini programs. Like if you're having a panic attack, you could just click on that in 5 minutes. I'll use the neurocycle to walk you through a panic attack, or you experienced imposter syndrome, and I'll walk you through that in 5 minutes. So there's at the moment 36 programs, and we keep adding more and more programs onto to help people with anxiety attack, this, whatever, all the different things that we can experience. And so essentially you do the brain. So in the Neurocycle app, I do, before you do the 5 steps, I walk you through a 2 to 3 minute brain preparation. So that's things like meditation, breathing, tapping, havening, all the things that we know that are great, and they work on the brain and the body. And the reason you need brain preparation, and the reason you need the mindset that I said, where you sit in the 2 chairs and you kindness, or the reason you do all of that is to get your brain and body's neurophysiology and neurochemistry under control. Because when your chemicals are flowing like crazy, and you've got high beta activity in your brain and high gamma and everything flowing like a tsunami in your brain, you're just not going to achieve much. You're just going to fall apart and just get worse and give up and think, I can't. And it creates a negative cycle. So it's very important that you calm your neurophysiology down and do all of that before you dive into the heavy work. The other thing that's really important is that don't go longer than 45 minutes in a session when you do the neurocycle. Stick with 45 minutes as your max. Put your timer on and stop after 45 minutes. And if there's 5 steps, it means that you're spending around about, under sort of 10 minutes on a step kind of thing. Under 10 minutes. 7, and you can even do less. You can do 7 minutes. You can do 5 minutes. Just don't, you need a minimum of 5 minutes, because then it's a minute per step, maximum of 45. And it's somewhere in that region. And don't try to solve it in one day. You can't do one neurocycle and solve your problem. You can use the neurocycling very quickly once you know how to use the system for that in the moment stuff. But when you're detoxing a trauma, when you're trying to find the root of a pattern in your life, it's going to take you the full 63 days. So that's all the sort of setup. Then the steps are gathering awareness, reflecting, 2 steps in writing, then an action step. Each step is taking your brain and making your brain work more, 2 sides to be more balanced, especially the frontal lobes and basically the whole balanced. You're activating all the different structures of your brain to be primed to function at their best. You are getting a great connection with your hormones, your whole hormonal endocrinal system going your body. You're controlling cortisol, your HPA axis. You are even influencing your telomeres, which are, if you think of DNA, and a chromosome looks like a little X, and my fingernails would be telomeres. And telomeres are a proxy for how you are managing your mind, how you're self-regulating. So the more self-regulated you are, the stronger your nails, the stronger your telomeres. And why is that important? You make 1 million new cells plus every second. Those cells form every organ and system of your body. So in other words, your body is constantly replacing itself. And the quality of those cells determines the quality of the health of your body. And that then feeds back into your mind. Because a sickly brain and body is very hard for your mind to work through. So your telomeres, you want your telomeres healthy. And I showed that within 9 weeks of mind management using the Neurocycle app, which is a 5-step system in the app version, people's telomeres went from being like really weak, broken, and short to long, strong, and healthy. So that meant that if you've got weak telomeres, this is how impactful it is. If your telomeres are weak and breaking and not working properly, your biological age, the age of your cells and your organs, will be older than your actual age, and they'll be sickly. So, for example, some of our subjects, and one of my case studies I put in the book there, that particular subject had a biological age of mid-30s, but their body was the age of a sickly 65-year-old. So if you've got a body
Oh,
that's a sickly 65-year-old, your vulnerability to disease is increased by 35 to 98%. So your chance of dying 20 years earlier from cardiovascular issue or stroke or something is huge. You could get hypertension and drop down dead like in your early 20s, which is insane. And that's what's happening now in this day and age with advanced technology. You are in the age bracket that's the most at risk. 24 to basically from the early 20s to mid 60s is the age bracket that's being most affected by this at the moment. So it's great you're doing what you're doing. It's great you're developing this insight, and I'm sure your audience is young like you. So I'm so glad that you're bringing this message to your audience, because you guys need to know how to manage your mind. It's critical. And it's our generation's fault, because and it's our parents' generation's fault. We've had this constant generational thing of not managing our minds. So we've hit the time now where we have to go back to managing our minds. So you and I are part of that movement. So it's really cool. So then coming back to the 5 steps, the first thing that you do is you gather awareness. And gathering awareness is an amazing thing, because just the word gather gives you control. And the whole thing is that we need to feel in control. We feel so out of control. You know yourself from what you've gone through. When things happen to us and we feel overwhelmed, we feel out of control. And the biggest thing is to give a person agency back. You control your mind, you control your brain. You can't control events and circumstances, but you can control your mind and your brain. So these are not your future, these toxic experiences. They've happened, but you can change them. And that's a message we're not told. And that's something that's so important to teach to people from very, very young, which I've done through my career, but we need to do it more. So gather, if you go into an apple orchard and you go apple picking, you have a basket and you gather the apple that you want. So you're choosing, you're controlling. You don't just stand under the apple tree and shake it and it all falls on your head. That isn't how you pick apples. You gather them. You stand back, you choose the tree, you choose the apple, you put it in your basket. That's the first step, is you gather. What are you gathering? You're gathering the signals, the clues. You think of yourself as being a detective, and you being a thought detective, because here's this pattern of depression or anxiety or panic attacks or relational issues. What's the dominant thing in your life? Start a neurocycle by deciding, okay, what's my most dominant thing in my life that's blocking my functioning at the moment? And there's probably 20 that will come up. Choose the most dominant one. And that's what you start with. So then you start gathering awareness, and you gather awareness of 4 areas. All the signals, these 4 types of signals. Emotional first. So that's like depression, anxiety, frustration, etc. In my book, I have a list in, I don't know, I think it's page 69, where I have a list of a lot of different emotional words. So you can look at that list as you're gathering. And remember, you're not going to fix it all on one day. I keep stressing this. It's going to take you a full 21 days just to kind of work out what this is and what it should be. And then the other 42 days to practice that. Okay, then you're going to gather awareness of your physical warning signals. So what's going on in your body as you feel this depression or anxiety or combination? It's never normally one, it's normally a few of them. And as you unpack them, you get more detailed information. What is the response in your body? Are you getting heart palpitations? Is your body tense? Are you having GI symptoms? Is there whatever? So gather awareness of those. And you may only get insight into 1 or 2 things on the first day. You may only pick depression, tension in my gut, and then the third one is behavioral. What are you doing? What are you saying? How are you acting? So you might just say, okay, I'm very withdrawn at the moment. Put that apple in your basket. And then what's your perspective on life? What's your mindset? How are you looking at life when you think about this pattern? Life sucks. 4 apples in the basket, that's fine for the first day. Then you start reflecting. Reflecting is a very deep word. When we talk about reflect, basically is reflecting light. Think of reflections, think of mirror reflections, think of reflections of the water. It's massive. Reflection is this complex, massive thing. So think of reflecting as, I am a complex person. There's a complex reason for my behavior showing like I am. So now I'm going to take those signals and I'm going to reflect on them. What are they showing me? And so you start digging through ask, answer, discuss for the limited time. Then on the third step, you write all that down. What you've gathered and reflected, you kind of encapsulate that by writing it down. But when you write in the form of a metacog. And I teach you how to do that in the book. There's an image and there's a whole description. And in the app, there's a video of it. And there's also images. And it's a way of writing I developed over 38 years ago, all been scientifically tested. It pulls the 2 sides of the brain together and helps you dig super deep into the non-conscious mind, which operates 24/7, which is all your thoughts with their memories. Thoughts are made of memories. All these little branches are memories. root memories, which is the source, and interpretation memories. This is all the data memories, emotions, what happened. Okay, what happened, your interpretation of what happened, your interpretation of what happened. That's toxic source, toxic interpretation. So all of that's in an unconscious. So when you metacog, as you when you go through the neurocycle, the gather awareness, and then the reflection, and then the writing, as you systematically do this, you are digging deeper, deeper, deeper. You're digging the soil off the tree. You're exposing these things. You are taking the energy from that, and you're starting to rebuild, and over the time period. So metacog is writing in a pattern format. It does all these amazing things in the brain, helps you to dig super deep. You just literally, it's a very messy step. It's disorganized. You can use colors, arrows, patterns. Words are on branches, words are connected like a tree. All branches grow out of previous branches. That's what a metacog literally looks like. It's a big mess. Words all over the place. And then the fourth step is you go into that. What you've done is you've pulled stuff up from the unconscious and you've dumped it. Now the fourth step, you go and sort it all out. You recheck patterns, antidotes, reconceptualize, look at it differently. And then the fifth step is you close the work off for the day. So now you've done all this work, now you seal it off for the day. This is finished, and it's a little action. And your active reach for the first day may be as simple as, I am not depression. I am depressed because of. Huge difference between the two. So you may have come into today thinking, I am depression. That's me. I'm brain diseased. I'm crazy. You go out of today, the first day of the neurocycling, saying, oh, I'm not crazy. Everyone's a mess. I'm not depression. That's a great thing. So during the course of the rest of the day, as you're tempted to fall back into this ruminating and like frustration and depression and just like life sucks kind of attitude, is you can say, I refuse to do that. I'm working on this, and you go back to active reach and you discipline your mind to not fall back into that well-worn pathway. You don't want to give it any more energy. You want to take its energy and put it into that. Energy is never lost. It's transferred. You want to transfer it from there to there. So the active reach is an action step to help you do that. And then just keep repeating that until you get to day 21. At day 21, you would have done this transfer. This is gone. You've now got the green tree with the little tiny green tree, which is what that was, now changed. And then you practice just one final active reach. You create a nice, quite meaty one, and that's what you practice for 1 to 7 minutes for the next 42 days.
I'm starting tomorrow. I cannot wait. I really am so excited. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about is self-sabotaging in relationships. A lot of what I've been talking about recently is just the uncertainties of your 20s. And what I've noticed even more recently within my friends and myself is how often people are just self-sabotaging in relationships, or maybe filling in the blanks for other people. I have mainly an audience of people in their 20s as well. So dating is a huge thing, and it's like the most asked thing probably in my DMs nonstop. So what advice or practical steps would you give to someone to stop self-sabotaging when it comes to relationships?
Okay, that's a really excellent one. There's so much of that is around identity. So first of all, the age is from the age 12 to sort of 20 is the most difficult part of the human life cycle. The second most difficult part is the age that you're at now. So from your sort of early 20s, and then you hit this, yeah. It's the second. This is not the first, it's the second. Good. So you've got a lot more insight, a lot more self-regulation, and it is where you are now, your identity is now getting very entangled in other people's identities in a way, because it's satisfying that need to be deeply connected with other people, which is always there from the beginning, but it's shifted now to that specific romantic relationship. So it's very dominant at this age, which is why dating is such a vital thing. Sabotage comes from these things. We sabotage is a signal that there's something undealt with in my life. I've done a lot of I have a podcast called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, and I do a lot of stuff on a lot of different stuff. And I did one recently on trauma bonds, and that might be a really great one for you to refer people to. But there's a ton of stuff on there, and I'm actually going to be doing a whole podcast on sabotaging in dating, because we've also I get so many DMs on that as well. Yeah. But essentially, it comes from how we show up. Always remember that how you are is not who you are. It's toxic. If it's healthy, then that's fine. But if you're showing up in any toxic way in your relationship, that is because of something. And then because of that, there's something that's happened. You see yourself, you think and feel and choose about yourself. You've interpreted this and it's all distorted. And because it's distorted, it creates all these immune responses and our body feels crazy. And in our mind, we get this whole response. And then that generates these signals. So the sabotaging is it's almost like a coping mechanism to try and process this or to try and numb this. It's such a weird thing. It's like using alcohol to numb pain or to get more, to make it easier in social situations for social anxiety. It doesn't really help in the end because it's psychoactive, and then there's often you have increased anxiety, the anxiety concept. So sabotaging comes, it means that we need to do work on ourselves and work as individuals. And if both partners are self-sabotaging, so self-sabotaging is because a person's this has affected their identity and they are acting in a certain way to try and actually control this, but it comes out all wrong. It's that transmit thing that we spoke about at the beginning. If you haven't dealt, you'll transmit. And self-sabotaging is an example of how we've transmitted this. So we have to use that as a signal, embrace it and say, okay, what am I actually doing? What are the details of the sabotaging? What does it look like? And do the neurocycle. And so start with the signals, look at the 4 signals, do the whole process, and then over the cycles of 21 days, you're going to get to the bottom of it and transfer and then practice it. Both partners should be doing that. Or if it's you as a person and your relationships keep ending because you keep doing the same thing, there's a pattern. You got a neurocycle. It's going to take you those cycles of 63 days. It may take you more. You may do one neurocycle, find you've only identified that corner. You still got those 3, and you see, oh, hang on, there's this and this. Doesn't mean that you can't be in a relationship while you're working on it. The fact is that you need to work on it. And it's you being honest and open, saying, okay, I am doing these things, and I know it's stuffing up our relationship. It's sabotaging. I don't quite know what, but I'm going to work on it. I see it, I own it, I acknowledge it. As soon as you do that, already this has moved in the conscious mind. It's weakened, and you've shifted the power balance. You are now you don't quite know you're still doing it, but you've now shifted the power balance because you've now controlled. So you've weakened it. And if something's weakened, it's malleable, it's changeable. So you honestly and open tell your partner that that's what you're doing. You recognize it. This is a pattern, and you're going to be working on it. And then gently, if there's something you can see they're doing, so maybe you want to try that too. Be careful of like you pointing, that kind of thing. And you just always then, because it leads to a lot of assumptions and narratives we make. We're very good at making assumptions, taking a person's statement and then creating a whole narrative in our mind and making all these assumptions. And then we build that in and we make this even worse. And then we come to the party and the other person does 70% of what you've in your narrative, if not more. In fact, between 70 and 94% of what you have in your narrative about the other person is wrong. And then we come with this 94% nonsense into the situation, and that then puts them on the spot and it increases aggression, and then it ends a relationship or something like that. So the assumption side, we need to remember that our assumptions create narratives, and those are up to 94% wrong. So we need to always clarify. I could say, okay, I'm working on this, I recognize I'm doing this, I think you meant this for this, did you? And if we did with that, even in the heat of the moment, we're not good at, if there is a heated moment, pull away, give yourself space, go do some work on your own, separate out and come back together. But always clarify those assumptions, because you will be 70 up to 75% wrong, and 94% of what you're worrying about isn't going to come true. So just bearing that in mind is reason enough not to make assumptions.
Wow, that is crazy. I'm so excited for your episode. I have listened to a few on self-sabotage and on relationships with you on your podcast, and I have loved them, so I can't wait for more. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. You're always welcome back. Literally, I'm like all the time.
Thank you.
At this point. Where can we find you?
Wonderful, thank you. My social media handles are Dr. Caroline Leaf, and as you know from Instagram, you can get everywhere. But my webpage is drleaf.com. There's lots of books and things on there. Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess is available wherever books are sold. Also on our website. I know there's a special at the moment going on where they save $11. This book is also 101 Ways to Be Less Stressed. So they get the two together. I have our conference, our annual summit. It's a mental health retreat. And this year I'm talking about, it's in person in Dallas. And I'll be really focusing on cleaning up
That's where I live.
post-COVID mental mess.
Yeah.
Oh, so do I.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you need to come. You need to come. So yeah, that's going to be amazing. It's a huge deal, and we're going to it's a retreat. It's a mental health retreat where I teach on how to manage. And this year it's going to be focusing on the mental mess created by the pandemic. You know, the isolation, the anxiety. Anxiety's tripled, and we're going to be really working on that. And then my podcast is cleaning up a mental mess. So lots of, and the app is Neurocycle, available at iTunes and Google Play.
Amazing. Thank you.
Tell you that